Yeah.
What we're looking for is we're looking to do something that we think is missing from the space, which is having technical conversations that are about, okay, what are you doing? How is it working? But not from this nonsensical tech blinders on perspective. So we're looking for people who are doing things that are interesting, where we can talk about what they're doing and how does it fit into the space for people who are educated about blockchain or want to get educated on the fundamentals. But it's mostly going to be us talking with them about what they're doing. So we're looking for people who are doing interesting things. If you have someone in mind, send it along.
Yep.
Let us know. We'll take a look at them. Because hopefully we can, get one up every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks. And it'll be an interesting discussion, and it will help us learn about other projects, and maybe we can find good ways to fit in with what people are doing.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm looking forward to getting out of our space and into other people's projects and what they're doing, and then also interacting with the communities as part of that. I think that'll be really cool.
So, mod tools. Are we on to decentralized moderation?
I think we are.
Okay. Let's start with a roadmap.
Right.
Why?
Why do we do this now?
Why do we have decentralized moderation? How does it fit in? Why are we doing it now?
Yeah.
You want to take this, or?
Well, I think it's something. So people would have, people who follow my occasional Twitter thread rants, or some of our earlier, the town halls or discussions will know that we've talked about this for a while in different ways, and we did some work on Red Square a while ago to make that more peer-to-peer, and this was sort of a precursor to be pulling content not just from a central server like Twitter, but actually to use a swarm of peers to do the social hosting. And so we had this in mind. It's part of a kind of program to really solve for the set of problems that you get when you try and do different kinds of applications in a genuinely peer-to-peer model. You don't give up and just say, screw it, we'll just do that in a centralized way. With that, we've also been getting some more and more traction and people interested in Red Square, and that really starts to also then clash with the aim of growing that with the occasional just fudding. And in some ways, what's worst about what really worries us is content that drives people away, not controversial content or anything so much as bad content that's just not contributing and not making it a fun place to be. And so that's sort of part of the reason we're looking to this now, is to try and really push and further growth on Red Square.
Yeah. I'd pull it back. I'd say it comes out of the roadmap and the dog fooding section of it.
Yeah.
Because, a lot of people, they're in this, EVM, like the Sol or the ETH, where they think, well, what you do is you build the VM and then you launch a bunch of speculative shitcoins, and that's your network growth. And by virtue of the fact that we are a zero inflation token, we don't have a block reward for security reasons. We've got growth around applications that use the PKI network, but where the early applications don't necessarily have the fee. And that's why we're seeing video comms. That's why we're seeing social. That's why we're seeing games, because we're growing traffic, we're growing awareness. We're not just doing, hey, you're trading some bat shitcoin meme coin on a VM and everyone's supposed to pretend that this is revolutionary. It's like, no, useful applications. And so we've been kind of watching, how do people use it? How do people abuse it? And for me, it's been really interesting the last 3 to 4 months watching, because as Red Square adoptions picked up, one of our early goals was getting the Saito community onto Red Square so we can test it. We're grateful to everyone who's come over. One of the things we didn't realize, that was really interesting to watch, is that a lot of the, there's this disruptive, Saito traders group or something, that's just filled with people. And they were some of the first people to come over. And it's really interesting, because you can't tell, are these people deranged, or are they
Saito traders, but just these occasional people who came across?
But it's interesting, right? Because taking a look at it, this is what decentralized media is, where the application can't discriminate. And so we're looking at it, but we're also looking at it from the perspective of what the roadmap is, which is that all of these tools, the video tools, the games, they've got to grow to be available for anyone who wants to do anything in this decentralized PKI network way.
Yep.
And we're taking a look at it, we're looking like, well, how do we get these other communities on board? And it interesting, it shifted the way I started taking a look at the crypto space, because I started noticing, why Twitter? Why Telegram? And realizing that all of these crypto communities, or a lot of them, and especially the shitcoins, and especially the meme coins, they are hiding behind the forms of civil resistance that are basically either a centralized server with centralized name, like that's Twitter. Like, like Elon came in and now people are complaining that there's more like bot posts around the popular image posts. It's like they're complaining about civil resistance on posting. But we're also seeing the same thing with kind of the Bitcoin style federated social networks. I remember, what was it, Farcaster or something? There were
Foster first and then Farcaster,
like there's been a couple of them where they're like, oh, we're decentralized because we're talking about crypto, but it's actually just a centralized version of Twitter with some kind of token integration, because they're like, well, let's build a version of Twitter.
The two models tend to be use add token features, and therefore it's decentralized, and therefore or maybe to use key pairs for login and identity stuff, rather than using a login and password. But other than that, they're entirely the same essential stack, usually, with a server in the background. And
it's the Silicon Valley growth strategy. You find something that's growing, like Google search is growing, and so targeting SEO 2006. The App Store, MP3s, that find something that's growing, latch onto it as an early adopter, use that to drive growth, and you can grow social media now through crypto as well. We'll see if it works out. But like, we're looking at it, and we're looking at it from a decentralized perspective, because what we want is the network to be useful for everyone. But we're also taking a look, for me, it's questions like you raised about curation, because one of the questions we keep asking ourselves in the dogfooding strategy is, what is it with every app that is stopping people from using it, or stopping people from using it more? And so with Red Square, it's like, well, is it a curation issue? Is it that people are driven away by negativity? It's actual, and it's not simple, because like decentralized moderation, there's going to be a sweet spot. You don't want to just be in an echo chamber. You want some of the excitement that comes from having viewpoints challenged. But at the same time, too much of it, you can kind of see people, they get frustrated. So that's where kind of decentralized moderation, we're looking at it. And that's why it kind of got pushed up, because Red Square is kind of I don't want to say it's been treading water, but a lot of it has been on the decentralized comms tools. We have still been working on Red Square. And so this is something that we're pushing out. And our goal basically is taking Red Square, and we don't want to add centralized moderation.
Right.
We don't want to have anyone gatekeeping who can and can't use the network. If you're using it, it's on you. But we also want to be empowering people so that the problems that people are running into is in their hands. And what that means is, it means that these mod tools are coming out where, for applications that are running on the Saito stack, first of all, there's going to be built-in blacklisting and whitelisting. Doesn't mean you need to use it. You can turn that stuff off. You can turn it on. There's also default controls now about who you allow to do whitelisting and blacklisting for you, because we're not like Twitter. One of the big changes, if you take a look at the decentralized space, is Twitter relies on names and emails and telephone numbers as your form of identity. But on Saito, you can't. We don't. We want you to have the ability to always nuke your wallet and fire something up with a new identity, because that's the network. Pseudo-anonymous usage is how you route around censorship. But if you're going to do that, then someone else who's using things like, do I know this person, to control their environment, we can't have them constantly exposed or not using applications. And we can't have developers to say, look, when you're building your application, you can't code that application in a way that protects it. So if you go, we're launching it. It might be live already. We're
pointing up.
probably tomorrow.
Yeah.
It's, we're going to be experimenting with this stuff for the next 3 weeks, a month, figuring out
Yeah.
how to use it, figuring out what the sweet spot is.
I
But
think that's something people don't appreciate about a tool like this, as against other things where you turn the function on and it's there. Is this ends up being a set of nodes interacting with others, all the people interacting on other people to influence what you're getting from your friends and what you're shielding your friends from, and so that creates like waves of change through a network rather than a discrete like, oh, this happened. So we're going to have to find out like what enables people to get the experiences they want, rather than like we should do X. It's not going to be clear that like we need to fix something.
There's basically 3 levels to decentralized moderation. The first is, how does it relate to the permissionless network in the app OS, which is the applications that are running in the browser. And so the basics are, you've got there's a core level of moderation, which is whitelisting and blacklisting. And if you turn that on, that will work by default. That's what the mod tools, it's a module, it's an application. So it's actually, it's like swarmcasting. It's an application that runs in your Saito wallet. This is why you can turn it off. You remove it, you're back to
no one's going to make you use it. So
likewise, you can run a browser, you can compile it in, you can compile it out, you can do whatever you want. It's fully under user control. And what it does is, if you turn it on, though, it's actually going to control. You can use it to control which applications get sent, which transactions get to carry their payload up to the application there. And this is where it gets interesting, because if you're doing something like an EVM, to keep your EVM in sync, you might want to have decentralized moderation for Red Square. But you don't want your EVM to start dropping and not paying attention to transactions. And so we need the ability for, in addition to core moderation, the applications all have the ability to specify, actually, I don't care what your core policies are, I want these policies. So for instance, we're thinking we're going to start with chat being much more open. Because we don't want people to be chatting in the Saito group chat and then someone's message just get filtered and conversations get confusing. So it's kind of like, I don't know if you guys remember BTCE. Richard, you remember?
No. BTC was early days Bitcoin stuff. That's to get spam from whoever hacked it whenever that happened.
I think that's where the troll box as a concept.
Poloniex also had one, but back early 2014 or so, Poloniex also had a troll box on their front screen, but they're probably copying it.
Holo called it the troll box, I think, because of BTCE.
They also had CSS, which BTCE didn't have any CSS.
It was just like it was a horror. But you know that's what you're getting. And likewise, we're taking a look at this, and we're going to be taking a look. We've now got group chats. So it's kind of like, well, if you want a more moderated community chat, you can do that. And this is part of the dogfooding process, looking at this, looking at how people use it. So please do come help us over the next 2 weeks, figure out what is the right balance. We're going to be taking a look. It's not just the browser as well. It's also things like the way that you will whitelist and blacklist things depends on how you're set up with your friends. Because you will do things like on-chain and off-chain blacklisting and whitelisting information sharing. So, because we're not like Twitter. It's not like Twitter's thing is, if we can prevent 99% of spam or 90% of spam, we can rely on individual blacklists to keep the other 10% out. Decentralized networks, we don't have that, because people can just go to new keys all the time.
Well, and we don't also want it. The idea here is not to let people hand over responsibility for moderating entirely without thinking about it. They can, but they have to do it by joining a group, by joining in and saying, I'd like you to do that. They can't just say, oh, Big Daddy Elon or whoever it is going to look after me and deal with, what I should see and what I shouldn't.
You can opt into that. And, if you're opting into Elon's, we've also got the concept of a hop for these kind of whitelisting and blacklisting notifications. So you could say, look, I trust Elon's judgment. Whatever Elon bans, I'm fine with. And actually, whatever a friend of Elon bans, I'm fine with.
Yeah.
or a friend of a friend of a friend. Or you can say 2 hops or 1 hop or no hops. It really depends on, we're gonna find out.
Yeah.
And this is why it's going to be.
It's also, funnily, the other. I'm not exactly sure what we've implemented immediately, but it's also, the logic is the other way around, right? I don't want a fire hose of junk about anything, particularly certain people. But if Dave says it's all right, like if he's reposting this, then maybe I do want to see it. Like he might be commenting on what they're saying or whatever, but you can get away from this sense of like some central authority pinned the comment, and so nobody else can talk about it because you can't see it. This actually gives you ways to have more nuanced ways of including information that maybe you wouldn't really want to see yourself unmitigated, but if someone you know and trust is talking about it or introducing the idea, then maybe it's worth having a look at. So it's less of a blunt tool too.
I mean, it's basically the same network needs to be able to support the 4chan community and the I don't know what is the opposite of the 4chan community. It's not Reddit.
This is one of the important things, because I think we mentioned this talking about it earlier today, Dave, but it's one of the important things to remember is we're talking often about the moderation you get on Twitter, and that's the model people have in their mind, but it could just be a group of people who want to discuss 18th century French crochet work.
Yeah.
And that's what they want to discuss. So they're moderating just for content, not on political grounds or anything, but they're just trying to keep the topic focused. So this set of tools allows you to do that as much as anything else.
It's also basic Kubernetes. Like you can hook up you can code a Saito module to control your garage door. And then you make your garage door, you create a social network between your garage door and your fridge.
Right.
You know? So whenever you open your fridge, it's like, okay, well, I'm going to make sure the garage door is closed. And you could use a signed transaction. And IoT, it's kind of a silly example, but it's tools for managing groups in a way.
Yeah.
So that stuff, it's going live tomorrow. It may already be live. And we're going to be taking a look at it, particularly with an eye to Red Square and improving the experience. If anyone has questions at the end, we can deal with it. I guess it does raise the question we should probably address, like moderation policies. What is it that we are going to be looking for on Red Square? The first thing I'd say is basically what we want to encourage is people. We want to make sure that the Red Square, Saito Media, provides a place where people who are coming to find information about Saito can actually find information about Saito.
Yeah.
And so if you are coming and you're participating in good faith, make sure you get yourself a Saito username. That's not a guarantee you're not going to be blocked. It's not a guarantee you're not going to be blocked, but it's a sign for us. Like there's going to be decentralized moderation. It's not going to be like Richard or me sitting on our keyboards, but it's the basics of this is what decentralized moderation is. Figure out how to signal to people that you're a good faith actor. It's very unlikely you'll be blocked. If there are issues, we probably could set up some kind of review process. But,
well, I think it's also important to be remembering that remember at that point that we're also talking about this is Saito's feed on Saito's node. And what we're talking about here is how do we optimize that, right? It's not about anybody not being able to turn it off. People can actually turn that off and see all the stuff that gets posted. And we'll also be interested in talking to anyone who would want to run a node where they've got a different set of policies and they're doing what they like. Ties into stuff last week with the tokenomics update. We've got Block Producer Fund. We've got these pieces coming in place to do that now. And so that's actually really, I think, exciting for us. And if decentralized moderation actually creates multiple separate communities, then that would be really positive. It's not a negative at all. So when we talk about moderation policy, we're talking about really think of this for us. It's as much about curation as anything else. It's about getting the experience really good. So if someone in bad faith keeps asking the same dumb question, to make sure that something that looks negative is always at the top of the feed, that's the kind of stuff we're going to be looking at removing. Whereas if someone asks a genuine question, there's no reason that they would be, that's actually great content, and responding to it is in everyone's interest. So it's not about, we're going to start censoring the channel or anything. It's much more about.
It's also another point, like with decentralized moderation happening that way, the person who's actually engaging in that way, it's like they're not actually harmed by it, because their relationship, like the moderation is taking place on the public broadcast. Like, this is another question. Like, let's say I reply to one of your tweets. Where does that fall, and how does that relate to decentralized moderation? What do we want the default policies to be? One of the things that is really interesting and excites me about this actually is, if you go into account and you pull up, it's going to be the mod tools. You can click on mod tools and you're going to get a UI interface. Mm-hmm. And you can see that we've already got the ability to add these custom logic, custom instructions for modules. So chat by default, it's like allow everything, because we think, as chat, deal with it's transient, deal with it, but so if you're building a module, we support 3. There's allow everything, allow nothing. So, because you may want a module that you want it to deal with things, but you want it to deal with transactions that are live on the network that are routed to it through other modules. So you can say, I only want to deal with transactions that have fees. And there's potentially a long list of things that we can do. Like we could say, I only want to deal with transactions that include a SIG from me that authorizes me explicitly to process them. I only want to deal with transactions that come from me or a friend explicitly authorizing. So we're trying to, it's kind of like the Saito OS concept that some people have talked about, where it's not just the functionality, it's trying to think through the basics and figuring it out so that Saito is a platform for anyone developing this stuff. And I'm looking at it, and for me, this is, again, it's been part of this big shift, is realizing that looking at other communities and other chains and realizing they're not even thinking of this stuff yet, because they're focused on the EVM and they're expecting the network and the fee to provide Sybil resistance. But when you're in the social media space, you can't, because as soon as you add off-chain swarming, you can't expect that every piece of data is going to come with a fee, because anything off-chain isn't. So it's a fundamental problem. I'm excited that in a way we're the first to deal with it. We'll see how this works. Yeah, no,
I'm equally excited. I think also to see how these principles stand up, right? So there is a better way. We can do things without having to have some, top-down policy on these things, and we can have good, healthy communities that will, in fact, push themselves forward without that need to be nannied. And so to me, this is actually exciting on a bunch of levels, to see it happen, to be part of a project working on it as well.
Do you want to deal with questions? I mean, we've got...
let's take questions. We've said we want to try and keep these things a bit tighter than we have been, and we've been 38 minutes on this stream. So, I think time to head into questions. I can see the YouTube live questions down below here, as well as
how about this
chat.
If you guys have questions, put them in chat now. We'll do what we did last time. Get them in a minute or so. We'll deal with them. And if you don't have questions, that's great, because I can have dinner. And Richard can go to bed. It
is 11 here. Well, it's nearly midnight here. Yeah. All right.
The first question I see is in the Swarmcast chat, which is, could Saito be a Nostr relay?
That's Hannes, by the way. Hi, Hannes.
Oh, hey, Hannes.
I just doxed the man, but...
I mean, you can get BTC integration. I think it's going to be possible to do things on Saito that you can't do on Nostr. My understanding is that Nostr is federated, and so it's basically a federated version of Twitter where it still has this heavy centralized control. Like with the decentralized moderation angle on Saito is that we can all be using the same server, and we all have different decentralized moderation settings in our wallet, and then the server is just giving us a different experience. So
Just looking at Ace's questions, he's asking if people could actually still do some kind of central moderation, just for aesthetics or whatever reason. You'd need a group of people to do that. You could you could always run different software on your node, but excluding that as a cheap answer, you'd need the buy-in of the people on the server. You could keep people quiet who you don't want there. You could also always have basically a policy where the group have to admit you. You can essentially be private, and you only listen to people who you've agreed to let in as such. So
yeah, you process transactions off the chain, you put them in a database, and then if you want to censor those, that's fine. The point is, when we say it's uncensorable or permissionless, it's not that people are forced to read your stuff. It's that anyone can set up a node on the network.
Yeah.
So if someone doesn't like the fact that you're doing this, it's like, well, look, okay, go set up a server.
Yeah, so that's good to point out that this has nothing to do with and doesn't enable keeping anything off the chain. And that's something we can't and won't do, and we're not talking about. This is giving people tool sets to say, given there's a river of everything and anything on the chain, how do you get what you want out of it as a community, as a groups of people? And so, yes, you could do that in a number of ways, for anything from a closed-off group with some kind of permissioned entry through to group moderation, through to just saying basically everything had to come via X, had to be approved by someone if you wanted to do it that way.
That may be one way to scale Swarmcast, right? Because we know that Swarmcast gets unstable once we get over. I thought it was about 35. I think we hit 43 last time.
Yeah.
But it's like the first two hops are pretty important, because if those hops start dropping, and so maybe it's like, well, okay, if you can control the first level, and that first level are people that are sticking around, you're going to be a lot more stable. You can spike that up. So it's how do you have a decentralized network but also have the kind of control that you need? It's a language for expressing that. Why don't we do anything on YouTube, and then
Maxime just pushed the same question. So he just copied this question in, which was thanks, Maxime, for helping out. I don't see any other questions right now, so why don't we wind up this one, get it in the can. So yeah, I can end the YouTube stream now. Say thanks to everyone who joined us on YouTube.
We'll see you next week.